Commander Ethan Carter's breath came in short, measured bursts as he dragged himself out of the wreckage. Smoke curled from the fractured hull of his downed vessel, its metal frame groaning in protest as the heat from the crash dissipated into the cool alien night. He forced himself to his feet, wincing at the sting of shallow cuts along his arms. His suit's environmental sensors blinked erratically, struggling to process the atmospheric data. The planet was alive with an eerie, luminescent beauty. Bioluminescent flora pulsed softly in the dim twilight, casting an ethereal glow on the rocky terrain. Above, 2 moons hung in a deep indigo sky, their light reflecting off jagged mountains in the distance. Ethan's training told him to assess, gather resources, and establish shelter, but another part of him, the explorer, the dreamer, was captivated by the strange, breathtaking world around him. He tapped the side of his helmet, bringing up his mission log. His ship had suffered a catastrophic systems failure mid-warp, dropping him into unknown space with no way to call for rescue. He was alone, stranded, and unsure whether the planet's life forms were friend or foe. Still, he had survived worse. The sound of movement caught his attention. Someone stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the twisted roots of an enormous, glowing tree. The figure was tall, humanoid, but undeniably alien. Slender limbs, skin that shimmered like liquid silver under the twin moons, and luminous eyes that watched him with unmistakable curiosity. Ethan's hand hovered near his sidearm, but he forced himself to relax. He had seen too many first contact scenarios end in disaster due to fear and misunderstanding. Raising his hands slightly, he took a cautious step forward, signaling peace. The alien tilted her head, studying him, then did something unexpected. She smiled. It was a subtle expression, but undeniably warm, as if she found his presence amusing rather than threatening. She took a step closer, moving with a grace that made her seem weightless. Ethan noticed intricate, almost biomechanical patterns woven into her skin, glowing faintly with each movement. He cleared his throat, his voice raspy from the smoke. "Hey there, I'm not here to cause trouble." She didn't respond in words, but her expression remained playful. Slowly, she crouched down and traced a symbol in the soft soil. Ethan frowned, kneeling to get a better look. The symbol resembled a spiral, its edges curling in on themselves. Was it a greeting? A test? Experimenting, he mirrored her movement, drawing the same symbol beside hers. A soft, melodic hum resonated from her throat. Approval? Perhaps? Then, without warning, she plucked a small, radiant crystal from a pouch at her waist and placed it gently into his palm. Ethan hesitated, feeling its warmth pulse against his skin. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. He looked back at her, trying to decipher the significance of the exchange. She watched him expectantly, eyes bright with amusement. The moment stretched between them, a silent understanding forming in the space where language failed. Then, from the shadows, more figures emerged. Tall, elegant beings with the same shimmering skin, their gazes fixed on the crystal in his hand. A low murmur spread through the group, something between fascination and disbelief. Ethan's gut tightened. He had clearly done something significant, though whether it was good or bad remained to be seen. The alien woman, Serafina, he decided to call her, clasped his hand briefly, fingers cool against his own. She motioned toward the others, speaking in a lilting, melodic language he couldn't begin to decipher. The others responded, their tones ranging from amusement to what sounded like approval. Ethan was about to ask, though he knew she wouldn't understand, what exactly was happening when one of the older aliens stepped forward. The elder studied Ethan carefully before nodding solemnly. Serafina turned back to him and, with a teasing glint in her eyes, made a gesture that needed no translation. A ring forming around her finger. Realization hit him like a meteor impact. "Oh, hell," he muttered under his breath. He had just accepted a marriage proposal. Ethan sat cross-legged on the soft, moss-like ground, turning the glowing crystal over in his hands. The weight of his unintentional commitment settled over him like a lead blanket. The alien village hummed with quiet activity around him, elegant figures moving gracefully between bioluminescent structures that pulsed with a faint inner light. Serafina knelt nearby, watching him with an expression that wavered between amusement and curiosity. She had been patient, allowing him time to process, but there was an undeniable expectation in her gaze. He sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "All right, let's get one thing straight. I had no idea what I was agreeing to." Serafina tilted her head, her iridescent eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. She had begun picking up fragments of his language, just as he had started recognizing the rhythms and gestures in hers. Still, complex explanations were beyond their current understanding of each other. Instead of answering, she reached out and tapped the crystal in his hand, then placed her own palm over her heart, a symbol of connection, bonding. Ethan exhaled through his nose, glancing at the other villagers. They seemed approving. No hostility, no accusations, just curiosity and expectation. Whatever he had stumbled into, it was no trap, but it was something important. Serafina rose gracefully and gestured for him to follow. He hesitated before standing, letting her lead him toward the heart of the village. Towering vine-like structures curled into the sky, their surfaces glowing with intricate patterns that pulsed in rhythm with an unseen force. At the base of one such structure, an elder stood waiting, a tall, regal figure with a presence that commanded quiet respect. The elder studied Ethan, then spoke in the same melodic tones Serafina used, but with a weight that carried generations of wisdom. Serafina listened attentively before turning to Ethan. Slowly, carefully, she mimicked the elder's words, shaping them into something recognizable. "You accept," Ethan exhaled. "What exactly am I accepting?" Serafina considered this, then gestured at the crystal, at herself, at the village. Her hands moved fluidly, sketching meaning into the air. Connection, partnership, a choice but not a forced one. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, where I come from, marriage is a big deal. It's not just some casual thing." He paused, then frowned. "You're not expecting me to, I don't know, move in immediately and start. I mean, I'm still trying to fix my ship." Serafina's lips quirked upward in that ever-present hint of amusement. "Learn," she said simply. "Understand." He studied her. There was no pressure in her voice, no demand, just an invitation that, at least, he could work with. Over the next few days, Ethan found himself immersed in the alien way of life. Serafina took it upon herself to guide him, introducing him to their customs and traditions. The village was a marvel of organic technology. Structures that grew rather than were built, tools that responded to touch and thought, energy drawn from the very air itself. Everything functioned in harmony, a seamless blend of biology and engineering that put human advancements to shame. Language became their greatest challenge and greatest triumph. They developed a system of shared gestures, fragments of speech, and the occasional exasperated expression. Serafina, with her sharp mind and boundless patience, picked up his words quickly. Ethan, in turn, learned to recognize the cadence and intent behind her melodic tones. Their bond deepened in ways that had nothing to do with the crystal or the expectations of the villagers. She was curious about him, his world, his people, the way he saw the universe. He, in turn, was fascinated by her ability to weave meaning into movement, by the unshakable confidence in her every action. Still, misunderstandings were inevitable. The first time he attempted humor, the reaction was mixed. He had made an offhand joke about how Serafina was probably older than he was, given how advanced her people seemed. She had simply stared at him, utterly perplexed, before pressing a hand to his forehead as if checking for fever. It took several awkward minutes to explain that no, he wasn't insulting her, and yes, humans sometimes said things that made no logical sense purely for amusement. She had been skeptical. The real challenge, however, came when he tried to participate in one of the village's energy-sharing ceremonies. He had watched the process several times, groups gathering, hands touching, a shared glow passing between them as if linking their very essences. When Serafina invited him to join, he hesitated but ultimately agreed. The moment his fingers brushed hers, a surge of warmth and something deeper flooded his senses. It was more than touch, it was connection, raw and unfiltered. He felt a whisper of emotion not his own, a glimpse of something vast and complex. Startled, he pulled back sharply, breaking the link. Serafina frowned but didn't press him. She simply nodded, as if understanding that he wasn't ready. That night, Ethan sat by the edge of the village, staring up at the twin moons. He had come here as a stranger, expecting little more than a fight for survival. Instead, he had found something entirely unexpected: acceptance, curiosity, maybe even something approaching affection. But was that enough to stay? His thoughts were interrupted by a low, rumbling growl from the darkness beyond the village. Immediately, he was on his feet, hand reaching instinctively for the sidearm at his belt. The growl deepened, and from the shadows, a creature emerged. A predator unlike anything he had seen before. Its body was sleek and sinewy, covered in shifting plates of organic armor. Its eyes burned with an eerie bioluminescence, locking onto him with predatory intent. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had no idea if his weapon would even work against something like this, but he wasn't about to stand there and find out. He took a cautious step back, calculating his options. Before he could act, Serafina appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. She lifted one hand and made a slow, deliberate motion. The creature hesitated. For a moment, it seemed like her presence alone was enough to deter it. Then, with a guttural snarl, it lunged. Ethan fired. The shot cracked through the night, striking the creature squarely in the chest. It reeled but did not fall. Instead, it turned its burning gaze back toward him, more enraged than injured. Serafina moved before he could. In a blur of motion, she leaped, her body twisting midair with a grace that defied physics. When she landed, it was with precision, her fingers striking the creature's exposed throat in a movement so fluid it seemed practiced. The beast let out a strangled cry before collapsing, its body shuddering once before going still. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Remind me not to get on your bad side." Serafina turned to him, her expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, with the same teasing glint she always had, she tapped the glowing crystal at his chest. "Protect," she said simply. "Together." Ethan swallowed. The weight of her words settled deep in his chest, heavy with meaning. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as alone as he thought. Ethan's fingers brushed over the crystal resting against his chest. It pulsed faintly, an echo of something unseen, something alive. Days had blurred into nights, the alien sky shifting in ways he was beginning to understand, the village rhythms becoming familiar. He had started thinking of this place as more than just a stop along a doomed journey, more than just survival. Serafina had stayed close, her presence an unspoken reassurance. She never pressured, never demanded, but there was something in the way she watched him, something in the way her fingers occasionally ghosted over his wrist, that told him she was waiting for a decision he wasn't sure he was ready to make. His ship was still a wreck. He had worked on it with the help of the villagers, trying to salvage what he could, but the truth was undeniable. It would take months, maybe longer, to get it spaceworthy again. If help didn't come, he would have no choice but to stay. And the more time he spent here, the less certain he was that leaving was what he wanted. The attack had changed things. The creature, one of many, according to Serafina, had been a reminder that this world, for all its beauty, was not without danger. But there was something else, something he hadn't been able to shake. The way Serafina had moved, the way she had struck with precision beyond instinct. It had been practiced, controlled. He had asked her about it once, and she had only smiled, a knowing glint in her gaze. Now, as the village prepared for another ceremony, one of their bonding rituals, Ethan found himself restless. He watched as the villagers gathered in their usual formations, hands brushing, energy flowing between them like an unbroken current. He had yet to truly take part, though Serafina had invited him many times. Tonight, something felt different. Serafina approached him, her steps slow, deliberate. The soft glow of the ceremony cast shifting patterns across her silvered skin, her eyes bright with something unreadable. She extended a hand, palm up. A choice. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't afraid of the connection. He had felt the edges of it before, the brief touch of something vast and intertwined. But this wasn't just participation. This was acceptance. Serafina didn't move, didn't press. She simply waited, patient as ever. With a steady breath, Ethan reached out, letting his fingers slide against hers. The effect was immediate warmth, light, a rush of sensation that was not just his own. He felt her presence, not in a physical way, but in a way that reached deeper, touching thoughts, emotions. Understanding flooded between them. She had known from the start, known that he was lost, known that he was searching for something he didn't know how to name. She had offered not a demand, but a place, a choice. Ethan's grip tightened slightly, and Serafina's expression softened. The bond solidified not as an obligation, but as something chosen. The village hummed around them, energy flowing, and for the first time since the crash, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider. He felt home. Ethan awoke to the soft hum of life around him, the gentle glow of bioluminescent flora casting shifting patterns on the curved walls of his temporary dwelling. The air carried the faint scent of something floral and electric, a scent he was beginning to associate with Serafina's presence. She wasn't there now, but he could still feel the lingering warmth where she had been beside him. The bond they had formed was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Something deeper than mere words or touch, something that resonated within him like an unspoken melody. The village was already stirring when he stepped outside. Serafina stood at the center, speaking with several of the elders in their lilting, fluid language. The conversation was tense, their usual graceful movements edged with something sharper. Ethan knew enough now to recognize concern when he saw it. She turned to him as he approached, her expression carefully controlled. "More creatures," she said, voice steady but serious. "Close." Ethan's stomach tightened. The last attack had been a warning, one creature testing the boundaries. If more were coming, it meant something had shifted. Something was driving them closer. He nodded. "How many?" Serafina exchanged a glance with the elders before turning back to him. "Many." Ethan exhaled sharply. He had seen the power these creatures possessed, had nearly died facing just one. If there were more, the village was in danger. He looked around, taking in the faces of the people who had welcomed him, who had accepted him. This was his fight now, too. Serafina touched his arm lightly, drawing his gaze back to her. "We prepare," she said, and so they did. The village transformed with efficiency Ethan could hardly believe. Barriers of glowing vines wove together into fortified walls. Energy fields shimmered into existence along key pathways, and weapons, sleek, elegant tools that pulsed with power, were distributed among the warriors. Ethan was given one without hesitation. Serafina trained him in its use. The weapon responded to thought and movement, shifting seamlessly between a blade and an energy projectile. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about precision, about understanding the flow of battle. She moved like liquid, every motion calculated, every strike deliberate. "You fought before," he said after hours of sparring, wiping sweat from his brow. It wasn't a question. She hesitated, then nodded. Long ago. There was pain in those words, a history he hadn't yet uncovered. But now wasn't the time to ask. That night, they stood together at the village's edge, watching the horizon. The creatures were coming. He could feel it, a low vibration in the earth, a shift in the wind. Serafina stood beside him, her fingers brushing his. A silent promise. When the attack came, it was swift and brutal. The creatures moved like shadows, slipping through the darkness with unnatural speed. But the villagers were ready. Energy flared, weapons sang, and the battle was joined. Ethan fought alongside them, instincts honed by years of survival kicking in. He covered Serafina's back as she moved like a force of nature, cutting through the enemy with fluid precision. The bond between them was more than just symbolic now. It was battle-forged, unbreakable. The fight was long. The nights stretched into eternity, but they held. And when the last creature fell, When the village still stood, a quiet realization settled over Ethan. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was home, and he wasn't leaving.